Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I am here with someone who is a very special guest, very exciting, very excited to talk to this person. They've got a lot going on in real estate right now in a lot of different ways. And I think there's going to be a lot of value here for people, for folks who are single family investors, who are multifamily investors, who are into development, who want to raise capital. There's so much knowledge that this person has that I am so excited to honestly learn with you guys as well and just learn a little bit more about what they have going on. So, without further ado, I'd love to welcome Dave Weinstock. How's it going?
It's going great. How you doing, AJ?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Like I was saying earlier, I'm so excited. I know you have so much going on. Just from the top level, just give us the big picture. What is Dave Weinstock up to today?
So right now, I'm in the middle of scaling a private equity company called DW Capital. And what we do is we are developers and value add multifamily sponsors. So we're either building or buying apartments or houses right now.
Yeah. So building or buying apartments and house. And there's so much that goes into all of that. You got a lot of different stuff, right? I mean, you got operations, you got capital raising, you're building, single family homes. So there's permitting, there's zoning, there's all sorts of stuff, right? I would just love to know. I have a list of questions because if I want to learn from you in terms of I guess let's start from the beginning, right? Can you kind of walk us through what did your journey look like when you first started and how did you get to where you are now?
I'd love to tell you that this was a thought out plan that I grew up and said I wanted to be in real estate. That wasn't the case. I was a computer geek growing up. And so, really, I was all about learning about computers. And when the internet became a thing, I'm old enough, I predate the internet. So, that was a thing. And that was exciting. And really, I had a whole career in technology consulting. And after that had kind of hit its point where I want to do something different, I basically had formed a company with three other guys, and we built it up and sold it to a private equity group. So, I did the startup life, did the consulting life, and then I moved to corporate America, cycled through jobs. But once an entrepreneur, it's hard to go back to the corporate world. So I cycled through jobs because I got bored. But at the end of that tenure, the public company I was working for had an activist investor bring the company private. And my senior leadership basically said, Dave, we've been inventing new jobs for you every year or two, but we're not going to do that for you because we have a different, set of mission right now to basically shrink expenses, et cetera. Tell us what you want to do and let's go find your home in the company. And I kind of said that wasn't really for me. And I think like a lot of people at that point, you go on a little bit of soul searching. And for me, I had some friends that had been flipping houses. And I said, well, this sounds like fun. Maybe I will try and do something like this. But I have a problem doing things lightly. And I just kind of go all in. And so I had bought a three-family building, and it wound up being a full gut job in conversion to condos. And that was my start of becoming a developer. So that's how I got in the industry. Not, I had, there is a caveat here. In my 20s, in my startup life, I was living on planes, trains, and automobiles. I spent a decade traveling. I spent a year in Houston, a year in New Jersey. Like I was all over the place. And I had gotten tired of paying rent because I was paying rent with never being there. One year I actually rented a couch because what was the point? And so I had a couple of friends who were older than me at that time. And I said, I need to buy something. And I wound up buying a two-family house. So I did do that in my 20s, and I bought another one shortly thereafter. But then that kind of ended while I kept working on startups and this and that. So the whole Burr model that everyone talks about, I didn't really know what that was. It didn't exist. I'm pretty internet. I mean, we weren't bigger pockets wasn't a thing. So I never got to that last R or repeat. But anyway, fast forward to when I left corporate. So I had to bring that piece. It's not that real estate was totally new, but I couldn't quite figure out what to do with it. I never had trajectory. But on my own, I did that first condo conversion and I learned a ton. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a ton and I still made money. And said, hey, this is kind of cool and fun and interesting. And I can tell you all the gory details, but short story long, 2 units went to 10 units that went to adaptive reuse and downtowns and subdivisions. And, you know, here I am today. We're finishing up 50 houses off of Boston area right now. We've got 220 acres under agreement to build 500 units of housing in different shapes and forms, in addition to the other things that we did.
Okay. Wow. So you just threw a lot in there.
Right? It's hard to compress over a decade of evolution. So I apologize. It's
No, no, no. It's awesome because it gives us so many different pieces to jump off of. So, okay, you talked about adaptive reuse. Let's just define what that is for people and kind of can you just talk through one of those projects that you had?
for sure. So on face value, the definition of adaptive reuse is finding one building meant for one thing and converting it to another use. In my case, the common thread in what I do is there's always a housing component. So I'm a big believer in that we have a housing deficit. We need to have more supply. Everybody needs a place to live. We need housing in all shapes and different sizes and forms. And this is one way to do it. And so, one example is we found a distressed downtown Main Street USA block. So it used to have offices upstairs, dentist office, doctor's office, whatever it's going to be. And then downstairs, your typical retail strip, which would be like, maybe there's a sub shop, a chiropractor, a nail salon, those types of things. But in our particular case, it was an owner who had inherited this building and they were not real estate folks. And so they took the cash flow, but as they lost tenants, they had a hard time getting new ones and they couldn't afford upgrades to the building. So over time, it became this downward spiral where in order to get new tenants, they had to upgrade parts of the building. They didn't have the money to upgrade parts of the building, so they lost more tenants. And so by the time we came along, we bought the building circling foreclosure, and the owner did not want to sell the building or represent it. So we really came in just at the right time for them to solve the problem. And we bought the building. Now, the adaptive reuse portion was we spoke to the town about what they'd like to do, about, what is the downtown, what is their vision for it, what are they trying to do. And I'm a big believer that downtowns are the lifeblood of every city and area, and you want foot traffic and people to go and congregate. And this block has been dark except for one restaurant that had been holding on for dear life. And so they said we'd be open to housing. We'd be open to apartments. We're going to be upgrading the zoning, but you can petition early. And so we went through the process, and it's not some days it's a light lift. This was a heavy lift. And so we basically gutted the upstairs and built brand new apartments. But along the way, we also put in a new water line. We put in a new sewer line. We upgraded the entire power to the building and brought it underground with a transformer vault. We added sprinklers that didn't exist to both the first and second stories. We replaced all the windows, we did the roof, and the list goes on and on. But at the end of the day, we brought this beautiful old, not circa 1900s brick building in downtown Main Street, USA, back to life. So that's adaptive reuse, and that's kind of what we do. The trick for adaptive reuse is you have to be buying it at a discount. We could talk about office conversions as an example. And then your cost to build has to be less than if you were to build it brand new. And that fit in both of these criteria. And, we got a very nice building and good return for investors to do a project like that, which was really a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah. And you had a lot of impact on the local community in a positive way. And you turned a space that it sounds like was being neglected and you turned it into something that was useful, that had utility. So I think that's awesome. I'd love to pivot a little bit into the single family development that you guys do, right? That is so, so interesting. And I want to get just all the thoughts, right? We'll just kind of we'll start from the beginning, right? Kind of how do you approach it from a macro level when you're looking at markets, for example? How do you judge and evaluate markets or specific cities and you determine, okay, yeah, this is where I want to build this subdivision?
So there's nuances there. And I want to make the caveat, although I am doing things of larger scale, I'm not what you would consider a production home builder like a Toll Brothers or D.R. Horton or a Pulte. Those guys buy massive amounts of land and they just build hundreds at a time. That's not my business. But I look from a market perspective in places that need housing. And so from a housing policy perspective, if you follow the news, you hear we have a housing shortage. There's not enough places for people to live in. Therefore, the price of what's available goes up. Rents become higher than what people can afford, and then everybody complains. Like that is, but we are creating that now. When I look to areas that have a tight housing market. There is some land or desire or ability to build some type of housing. And then it's a numbers game. It's challenging, but construction's very expensive these days. And so you just have to see if it's an area that will support it, that there are amenities and things for people to do in the area. Um, and that's the criteria. I'd say it's a lot more opportunistic as well. If you find land price the right price point in an area that you think will support it, you can usually make something work. You can be in, downtown Atlanta, downtown Chicago, etc., and it's never going to work for a developer like me because that's the institutional guys. They don't need the same type of returns or profitability or a sovereign wealth fund that just needs to keep up with inflation. So it's just a kind of a different game. I don't know if that helped answer your question, but I look for places that are in demand with housing. They're feeding some type of economic center that has jobs and things to do, and where there's just a general lack of housing, which is usually evidenced by rising or higher home prices or rising or higher rents.
Right. Yeah, and I'd love to jump off of that because there's a lot of parallels there with multifamily investing, for example. You want to invest in places that have a lot of demand, maybe not oversupply for multifamily. So I'd love to ask you in terms of the underwriting process when you're analyzing, build to sell or build to rent. I'm not sure what your exit strategy is. If you can elaborate on that, that'd be great. But build to sell or build to rent single family development versus like a multifamily value add buy and hold project or an exit. What would you say are some of the differences when you're underwriting those?
Well, so let's talk about the market first because we do both of those, obviously. So on the value add multifamily side, we basically look for areas where all boats are lifting. There's a rise in average median income. There's a population growth. There's multiple economic employers, and the list goes on, no crime zones, that kind of fun stuff. If all boats are lifting up in the market and you find an existing building, you have a pretty good idea that if you refurbish it and go closer to the market rates, it's going to make money in demand because with all those economic drivers and all those people moving in, unless there's already a huge supply of housing that hasn't been used, which is not the case, it's going to do well. And so now it's about your business plan. When it comes to new home construction, it's actually a little bit different. So in the value add space, I would never enter market with a declining population.
Mm,
But I'm doing exactly that right now for our new project next year. And so I will talk a little bit about how we looked at that market. So the particular town that we're looking in is 10 minutes to a major city. The city has all the factors that I said before: high rents, no availability, huge demand. You look at this town, the population's aging and it's declining in population. And it's that first outpost beyond the major city. But if you look at the 3 or 4 surrounding towns and cities, 2 or 3 of them are growing at 8 to 10%. And so you say, well, what is different? What's going on here? And when it comes to new land development, it's constrained. It's purposely constrained or causally constrained in certain markets. So for the town we're looking in, their zoning laws typically don't have buildable lots. They passed zoning and 90% or 80% of the land mass in the entire US is single family zoning, which mandates a minimum lot size and has all of these constraints. Zoning went in place after certain cities and towns were built up. And so that usually means you can't rebuild what's there because it doesn't adhere to zoning, or if you go through an expensive process to maybe get that piece. So this particular town had outdated zoning, 2-acre lots, where the all other cities and towns had a 3rd-acre lots. So much easier for them to build and develop in those areas versus in the area we're looking at. We happen to get a large piece of land, so we had land where we could build stuff. Second piece is a critical factor is access to city services. People take it for granted that when you flush your toilet, it goes down the sewer in most cases. But depending on the area you're in, there's certain capacity to the sewer, and you can only add so many units at a time, or it doesn't have a sewer at all as you get more rural and you're on a septic system. That add costs and change the viability. So factor in there's 3 or 4 other layers to this, but we looked for an adjacent community where land happened to have come up and noticed the crush in other communities. We spoke to the town, we spoke to the planning department, and we've learned a lot of things as developers. So there are different ways we can build that gives us more certainty that we know we can build something that makes sense for us. And without going too much into the nuances, the one thing that's important in Massachusetts is affordable housing is very important. And there's a mandate that every city and town have a certain percent of their housing stock affordable.
Mm.
If you don't meet that requirement in that city or town, as a developer, you have the opportunity to file under what's known as 40B, and that has to do with the actual law.
Sure.
But basically, it bypasses a lot of the local zoning municipality stuff as long as you build a certain percentage of affordable units. So we knew going into the land that we could build that way, and we could then talk to the town about what they wanted, and they wanted to change their zoning. So, it's much more involved than a value add multifamily market. It takes a lot more time and effort to do so. But honestly, development tends to be hands above anything in terms of profitability, in terms of real estate, provided that you can take your time and effort to do it. It's all value add. The differences in an existing apartment building, the value add is new kitchens and bathrooms and new paint on the outside. When you look at raw land, value add is getting it approved for another use, similar to the adaptive reuse, and then building the building on top of that. So you are doing it in different steps. And so each piece of the additional value add creates your profitability. And so obviously there's more of the pie within a single family development than a value add multifamily, but with it comes risk.
Right. And just to clarify, would you say your exit strategy is more sale, or is it you're building these and then you're holding on to them?
We do both. So it has to do with the market because building is expensive. And so if the land and the construction costs in the market we're working in is that high that our equity gets locked in and we can't actually rent it profitably with a good margin, then we sell them. And that usually means it's, a very desirable neighborhood area, et cetera, and home values are up. So the numbers work that way. If you're in, I don't want to say a softer market, but one where you have greenfield development, you can build hundreds at a time. The land is inexpensive, the labor is production based, and you usually can throw up a lot of houses and still get really good rents for it. So, we've looked at build to rent product in the Carolinas and Tennessee and other places, and it pencils there. In the Massachusetts market, it's very, very rare to find things that pencil as build to rent. So a lot of the stuff we do here is built for sale because, you know, people pay a premium because we're really constrained even more so on housing up in the Northeast compared to some of the other markets.
Yeah. Goes back to supply and demand. There's not a lot of supply, a ton of demand, and you guys are able.
It is. I mean, well, I like to say something little contrary. I'll tell people we don't actually have a national housing shortage. We have a shortage of housing people in places where people want to live. So if you want to be in an old coal town, you want to be in rural America, there's plenty of houses. Detroit has plenty of houses. But if you want to be where they're building new battery plants or manufacturing or pharmaceutical or even tech hubs of, West Coast or Austin, Texas, there's so many people moving into those areas still, regardless of what you see in the headlines. And there just isn't housing capacity for it yet. You got to build it.
Yeah. Speaking of building, one of the biggest components of that is financing. And you've got the debt side and you got the equity side. So I'd love to pick your brain on that in terms of the debt side. Let's start there, right? Kind of what does the capital stack look like for build to rent development, build to sale development? What does that look like on the development side? And how would you compare that to the multifamily, redevelopment side?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you structure it. So you have some latitude, similar to on the value add. So in the value add situation, you might start with stabilized debt that's fixed, that's from an agency lender. You raise the equity and you raise extra money to renovate the units on top of that. Or you might take out bridge debt, which gives you a higher amount of the debt at a higher rate, but it's a little more variable on the rate and it's a little more expensive to do it and there's a time limit to it. So everyone threads the needle differently on that. On the development side, they're structured, some of them are structured the same, but mostly structured differently. So usually if you have a horizontal site, so building houses in a subdivision, you usually have two loan products happening at the same time. One is for the land development piece, because subdivisions are building towns and neighborhoods. So there's roads, sewers, power, infrastructure, streetlights, fire hydrants, curbing, all that stuff. So one loan covers all of that. And that tends to be a construction loan that as you do more of the work, the loan gets bigger and bigger until you hit your budget. Then, depending on how you do home building, you might get what's called a revolver. And so what happens is the bank says, well, gee, we know you're going to build X homes. What's your capacity to either build or sell them at any given time? And so what we do, because we don't do hundreds at a time, is we probably build 4 to 6 houses at various stages at one time. And so we have a revolver loan that says you can build up to 6 houses at any one time. And what we do is we'll always have one house that's finished, one house that's a little bit before that, and then 1 or 2 houses that are like starting and getting ready. And that's just our personal preference because we prefer to have something finished, closed, move to the next one, and kind of reduce our risk profile. But when the markets are super high and buyers are lining up, we might do 3 or 4 at a time and sell 3 or 4 in a month. And so you can go as fast or as slow as they can sell, but it kind of caps how much you go. When you're doing a full built for rents, you sometimes want something like that as well because as you rent houses, you want to reduce your burn on this. So like once you finish one, if you can get it rented, it starts paying for itself. So you want that off your loan and just kind of start moving that way. If you're going to build condos or vertical homes that way, you take the loan out all at once and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then each one sells down and down and down. So condo buildings are probably the hardest out of all of them, I think.
Yeah. And so that's the debt side. I know we have some questions on the equity side just in the chat here. One person, and I'd love for you to just kind of go through the equity, how you guys look at that from an equity side. But one person is asking, David is asking, how do you take self-directed 401k or other investment account funds for development projects? Yeah. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so we can take funds from various things. The one thing we can't do is 1031 funds because that needs to be an active. If we're going to hold it for renter, we could take 1031, but if it's built for sale, we can't. But yeah, no, people, as long as they use, basically, there is a third party custodian for their IRA or et cetera. As long as they authorize it being a self directed one, any funds from retirement accounts, solo Ks, solo IRAs, STRAs, all those can be used as they can deploy that. And that actually has some benefits for them, certainly on the tax side.
Yeah. And there's another question here from David. Are your investors able to reap any tax benefits as passive or active investors? And what's your structure for that?
So this is a good question. I want to kind of draw a line down the middle between my two businesses. So when we're doing for sale products, we have a higher return profile, but most of those returns are still, I mean, they still can be long-term gains and they can do those pieces, but they don't have the same tax shelters as the value add multifamily on the existing. So from a tax perspective, the value add multifamily is a much stronger one for tax deferral strategies, although the return profile is a little bit lower. So it's kind of a diversification option. So you can look at it two ways. If you have a nest egg already or you're a little more conservative, then value add multifamily is probably a really great, strategy and vehicle for you to kind of build, consistently and continue to go up. Development is kind of an all-in strategy. It's high risk, high reward, but you pay the taxes.
Right. Right. So, in terms of, we've been talking about multifamily redevelopment, single family development. What are some lessons from the single family development space that you found have been valuable in the multifamily space and or vice versa?
Well, so I'll take it two different ways. So first, just development versus value add. Because I was a developer first and learned how to build buildings, whether it was a single family condos or a building, there's very little in the value add states that scares me away. So it's a huge benefit to understand development, at least on the sponsorship side, so that we can go after deals that other people may or may not feel comfortable doing. And also just worry about if their numbers are good. So we feel really confident on that. What was the other part of the question?
Yeah, just lessons from the development space and how it translates into the value add space or vice versa.
Uh, well, I think that's the lessons, development. So you're not scared of what happens in the ad space because there's always, I think the universal is regardless of what people tell you, every single project, every single asset you buy, even if they look exactly the same, always has something new to learn. And so the trick is as you do this more and more is to be adaptable, build your Rolodex. So, oh, I've seen something like this before and just kind of keep adding to it. So I think you learn every project, and I learn and get better for every project. I mean, been at this for about a dozen years full time, and first property years ago, and I'm still learning today. And at this point, I've hired a team, and they've got their own learnings that they've done that are different than mine. Um, I think that's also the fun of this business, you know, being adaptable, solving problems, working on relationships, and something I find really rewarding is seeing the end result of all of this. Like, we're a housing provider. We build housing for people. This on the for sale side, this is someone's new home and seeing the spark of joy they get. We've got this neighborhood we've been building and have got pictures when it's all just like trees and dirt and this dirt road coming in on one side. And now you come in on one side and it's like family flame. They had um, Halloween decorations up because Halloween just happened a couple of weeks ago. And you get further in until you get to the other side of it. And then it's like dirt and foundations and newly framed houses. And like, this is going to look like this. And people would walk their dog past the new construction, and it's like, it's exciting. And you go back to those, a couple of years and the trees have grown up and you never remember what it looked like. You just think it was always supposed to be there. And that's fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. If you were, let's say you were starting from scratch, right? What would you prioritize in terms of building relationships, sourcing deals, structuring financing? Say you're going back to day one. How would you think about those things and in what order?
I think the most important thing you can do is surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to do and find people that like, and trust and have a communication style that you understand. Everybody talks in a different way. And we've all seen it. There's some people that are to the point, and if that works for your personality, keep talking and find people like that because you will learn the most from them because you're receptive and it's your style. Or find a complementary style that do those things. But it's really about finding that set of peers and mentors and those types of things, regardless of how you find it. I mean, some people do the mastermind route. There's probably some benefit in doing that for just being in a room of people who are hand raisers and want to be helpful to each other and are at different levels. But otherwise, it's meetup, it's talking to your neighbors, it's just reaching out and asking, even at the stage that I'm at, I have a whole circle of advisors and mentors and friends. And whenever I see something interesting, I'll ping those guys and ask, what do you think? And they're not partners, they're not actively doing my deals, but because the relationship we forged, you want to kind of help the next person. So your personality has to be that you want to be helping people because it lifts all boats. And otherwise, I've been known to reach out to random people on LinkedIn or directly to their company and saying, listen, I'm actually not a client, but I saw that you were doing this and I'm just really interested to learn more. And that's the same thing I did when I was 20, when you're first trying to learn about companies and if you wanted to interview there. But I think that continuous networking and learning is so important. And that's the one thing. And again, I'm very fortunate for where I'm at and for what's happened. But if I could go back and talk to my 20-year-old self or 30-year-old self, oh man, like drop the nervousness. Don't worry about looking silly. Don't worry about not knowing what you don't know. Raise your hand, reach out, ask a lot of questions, and find your tribe. Find the people that want to hang out with you or that want to help you, and do it for being you and not because you want to just have an empire, but because you want to learn.
Yeah, and when you start doing that, you start to realize too how many people there are that are willing to help you out just because of the same thing that you mentioned earlier, right? Someone else helped them out and they want to give back in some way. And I know I had met you at one of these masterminds, one of the conferences, and we had a conversation and we were able to chat and you shared some things and now I've got you here and I'm asking you more questions. But
Yeah.
it's you
Oh,
know,
no, you can reach out anytime. But honestly, even if somebody reached out to me cold, if it is a person who's moral and ethical and is trying to improve themselves, I'll always try and take the call. It may not be 5 calls or, hours and hours, but I'll always take the call. I mean, that's why we do this. I mean, we get to do this work. I don't have to do this. I get to do this. And I'm very fortunate to do so.
yeah. So in terms of markets, kind of going back to that, do you invest in one market? Do you invest in multiple markets? And if you do invest in multiple markets that are outside of your personal state where you live, what advice would you give to out of state investors who are looking to invest in either developments or multifamily properties in different markets?
So my model, I'm a bit of a type A, and I feel that you always need a local presence in whatever markets you want to be, because I just don't think you can be everything to everyone everywhere. And I also think that you can't be great at knowing what block, what street, what part of town is good if you're looking nationwide. If you have a staff of like 20, 30 people, that's possible, but that's usually not the case. So in this particular case, what I would say is for us specifically, we pick the markets by traveling to them. Uh, Demographics, economics first, then traveling to them, getting a network there of people we know, like, and trust and can rely on, and then evaluating the deal. Sometimes the deal comes and then you hop in to make sure you can build that network and you feel comfortable about it. But mostly we do it. And selfishly for me, because I had a career on planes, trains, and automobiles, I picked markets that I could fly into in the morning, have meetings for the day, and get home if I chose to. And so that was this. My acquisitions director has taken me off that fence, but that's still predominantly our home territories because the good growth markets, we have a network there, we have expertise there. So for us to go beyond, it has to be opportunistic with the right person, with the right story that we feel comfortable in growing in us. But we don't look for one transaction, we look for a relationship. That's our model.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned a lot about kind of the operator or about the market, and I'm just curious, how do you manage risk across your single family, multifamily projects? What's your philosophy in terms of diversification within real estate?
I'm sorry, say that one more.
Oh, just your philosophy in terms of diversification. Do you diversify pretty widely across operators? It sounds like you like to keep the relationships pretty strong and pretty tight, or maybe the market's pretty strong and pretty tight. So just curious in terms of your philosophy toward diversification versus concentration, towards risk management, how do you think about those things and what are some of the ways that your business navigates those?
So it keeps me up at night. I think it depends on who you are within this ecosystem. So I'm both an investor and a sponsor. And so my own money's in my own deals. My own money is in other people's deals. Sometimes it's collaborations, etc. I think when you're starting out, you kind of start a little single threaded, one deal or 3 deals with the same person. But as you go along, you have to start thinking about diversification. We do as well. And so we think about geography. You know, if, for example, if you really like Florida, well, Florida has had a lot of headwinds lately. So if that's the only place you had your portfolio, people who are only in Florida are probably suffering a little bit. So I think over time you need to start spreading out geography. Second, operators. You know, we have local partners, but we are also an operator ourselves. Internally, we're building staff and a team so that it's not all about me. And so if I get hit by a bus, our operations continue. So that's another way. And then the last piece, if you're in this game long enough, everything's about diversification. And so you start moving to different asset classes. You look at, different types of investments for different reasons. So obviously, as an individual investor in, value multifamily or just in real estate, you have certain tax benefits. Well, there are lots of other asset classes that have tax benefits. They don't have the same high returns, but they might have a higher tax benefit. And so you have to start working on individual goals based on investor and outcome. And I already know that, 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now, more and more diversification for tax advantage stuff and also just security. I mean, laddered CDs are the most boring thing out there. They don't make a ton of money, but what they do is they keep ahead of inflation and give you steady cash flow. Retirees love laddered CDs because that's how they generate, a couple bucks every month to live. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make 20%. It doesn't double your money, but it's a piece of the portfolio. And I think the longer, again, in the investment game, you start to spread out, but that's happens over time.
Yep. I'm curious, kind of going a little bit back toward the single family developments, just because it's such a unique space and you guys are doing a lot of different things there. Are there any specific design elements or community elements that you include inside of these developments to meet the demand from today's buyers that you think are really exciting, really unique, that you think maybe were unexpected?
I think COVID completely shifted the landscape of what people built. And so I think the rise of the home office, the bonus space, that certainly is something we have heard a lot and incorporated into our designs. Obviously, modern look and feel and, open concept. And now we're getting to like somewhat smaller spaces again. But yeah, no, it varies. I mean, in our cases, again, we're not building usually 200 at a time like Toll and those guys. So we have time to adjust along the way. So our current subdivision in place, we're really, really tightly knit with the brokerage that's working on the sell side. And so we always ask them, what do the buyers like? What didn't they like? What are they looking for? Because we're constantly building a house every month or two. And so we slowly iterate our designs based on the feedback. And we're fortunate we get to do that. So I mean, bonus rooms in the basement, move the garage sometimes if it works out for the lot, it's that kind of stuff. But it's those little can mean a lot, in just terms of lifestyle. So, something we're beginning to do right now is also a flexible room that can serve as a first floor uh, primary bedroom. So as people are aging in place or if they want their parents to live with them, there might be a first floor bedroom they can use. So it's things like that. So yeah, we're adjusting based on the demographic. But I will also share, we had one idea of who was going to buy the houses when we first started this. But as we started getting buyers and buyer feedback, we started adjusting and the buyers we got adjusted too. So that's for us, we adjust and that's the fun part of it.
Right. When it comes to raising capital for deals like this, for developments, for value add multifamily, how do you guys approach that? Do you have a fund? Do you syndicate it? Do you do joint ventures? What does that structure look like for investors?
I mean, so it's all the above. So each deal for us is different. We look at the merits of the deal and how the economics are going to work. So we have to have a defined start, middle, and end that makes sense for investors and figure out when and where we want the equity to play. And so we have done straight equity deals where they invest with us. We do the entitlement work on our own dime. That's the most risky part to figure out exactly what you can build. That's our cost. We always do that on our own dime. Once it's been entitled and we're getting ready for an approval and putting a shovel in the ground, we'll shop to investors and do the whole equity and say, this is our projection. This is when you'll get payments. We'll structure it that way. And we usually pay the investors back first their capital, and then they get to ride along and get the upside at the end. Because we try and accelerate capital repayments, especially in a development deal, given the risk. We have done deals where the seller financed the equity as a second. We have done deals where we have done working capital loans, midway through the project. That was just for a term. So very similar to like mezzanine debt, but it goes away. And we've even done everything like, oh, we will pledge these lots to you and you can pre-purchase them and they're yours, but we get the working capital until they're ready. And again, it's all just a different way of moving around items in the capital stack. And so the way I see it is any investor who's going to work in the development, they need to get a certain return. And so we do our best for them to take the risk to get the higher reward for it. And again, we're fortunate that we're not super huge, but there's always a certain percentage of ours. Even on big deals, it's at least 10% of our equity, on a big deal. So we already have skin in the game.
Yep. And we've talked about some prior deals that you've done. I'm just curious, do you have a favorite deal or a deal that sticks out in your mind the most that you've done, or maybe a deal where you've learned the most lessons? Just something that is memorable or sticks out that you think would be valuable for other people to hear.
So I think my very first deal after I left corporate America is worth sharing. And everything went wrong. And it's the one I learned the most, but it's also the one that set me up on this path. So I bought a two-family building and I hired a contractor that I got through a referral through, someone who was an investor. His price was really, really good. And he showed up in just his pickup truck and gave me a really, really good price to do the whole thing. And I'm like, this is great. And I gave him a really, really big check. And I didn't hear from him for a while. And then I called him and he said, oh, it's a lot bigger. I actually need another check. And at the time I said, well, how much more do you use? Like, well, I just need this much more. Okay. But then you're going to start next week. Yes, I'm going to start next week. And so he got another check from me. And this was a guy that had done work for other people I knew and was not brand new. It was my first time working with him. Then work didn't start. And I finally threatened. I said, listen, you're either going to return my money or start the work. And he gutted the building. And a week later, I got a stop work order and a notice from the town because he basically gutted the building without a permit. Try and track him down, can't find him. Hire a private investigator, found him. He unfortunately had taken my deposits and others, and he was just at a certain point in life that his moonshot was he always loved and wanted to open a restaurant. And he took my deposits and other people's deposits to basically pay himself to get the last push to try and open a restaurant that he was buying. And needless to say, he did not get a chance to open that restaurant. He did get sued, and I did recover 50, 60 cents of every dollar that I gave him. But what it did, and again, I'm sorry, so this is a longer story, and I'll try and not go too long, but I really had to take stock and go, what do I do from here? And I interviewed 4 or 5 other builders, and I basically narrowed it down to 2 that I liked. I said, listen, I actually don't have enough money either out of my pocket or from the bank to pay you what you want for this, but I'll split the profit with you. Would that be enough? And would you be willing to do it? And again, the relationship, the conversation, the openness, asking for help, explaining what's going on. I was fortunate enough to find a really great partner that started with me at that time, a builder. And I went into the building department and the planning department. And I said, this is what happened. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm working with this guy now. What do I need to do? And they were actually very good with me and said, we're not going to read the building code for you, but there's a building code. You can read it and understand some of this stuff. There's a zoning code you can read it. And I read it and I came in with questions and they were very helpful. And I showed up at that job site every single day and learned how to build a house. I asked, why do you do this? Why do you do that? But every single day for 12 months. And we sold them as condos at the end. It wound up being 2 condos, side-by-side townhouses, and made money on it, even with all that stuff. And I kind of had the realization at that point, like, I just got paid education, made a ton of mistakes, and was fortunate enough to come out on the other side of it. And this is all that I learned. And from that point, because I knew how to build a house, I knew how to build these, and I knew how to navigate the systems, and I had this network built for basically making mistakes, that started my scale. And so 2 years went to 7, went to, all the other stuff that I've told you about. So wow, that's where I learned the most. that's what set me on the path of becoming a developer. And then, midway through, I was very busy developing. I needed to diversify. We started having good exits. We started buying apartments, then with friends and family. And fast forward, I decided this is, not just what I want to do lifestyle wise, but I want to build a company. And that's, where we are today.
Awesome. You took a gut punch and turned it into a business.
Problem to solve.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. Wow. Well, we've already gone for almost an hour now. Yeah, like this has been awesome. I would love to have you back on again. But let's just say if you, as kind of a final question to you, if you were to have a piece of advice or a billboard that could say anything, or if you were to tell someone, a piece of advice, any kind of advice, what would you have to someone who is either an aspiring multifamily investor or an aspiring developer? What would you tell that person that's at that beginning of their journey?
It's cliche, but your network is your net worth. Find mentors, find friends, be open to partnerships early, test the waters. Um, because you will go much faster and grow much better when you've got a team around you. And again, I started on my own and did not take that advice, and I've moved way quicker now that we have a community.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Dave, it's been great. Thanks for hopping on with me. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you guys want to connect with Dave, where can they find you?
They can find me at my website, dwcapitalllc.com, investwithdw.com, or Facebook, LinkedIn, all the usual stuff. Thank you. This has really been great, AJ. I really appreciate the time to chat with you, and I look forward for staying in touch and chatting more.
Absolutely. Yeah, same here. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. And we will see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Central. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye, everybody.